Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is One Day Today, episode 149. Excited to have you with you, and I'm excited about our guest today. But we are here to share your gifts. In particular, our guest today's name is Mark. You'll meet him in a second, but what this space is about is no matter who you are, where you're from, what you believe, you have something unique to offer and uplift. You know yourself, your family, people you don't even know, strangers. We all have that in us, and we all have it seems pretty apt metaphor today, especially because of our guests, but we all have the choice to plant seeds of love, of beauty, of laughter, wonder for ourselves and others. And today is no exception. And it's what's kept us going, and that's why we're here. Is what would be possible in a world where each of us are empowered and inspired to share our own gifts. What would the world look like? What can it look like today when we share our unique gifts? And you know that's why we're here. That's what today is about. And I think I'm just feeling I'm going to hop into it. First, I haven't seen Matthew in a while. He's been running around, from Hawaii to Colorado and dealing with flooding of his place. So how's it going, Matthew?
All in all, really well, and at the same time, really hectic, crazy, and wild. Like
Such
I'm
is life, my friend.
actually, yeah. So like I don't. I'm sure you guys can see the background right now, but I'm actually working and doing the show at the same time. And it's funny. Before we even hopped on, I was talking to my friends here, and because we've been dealing with an issue at this job for weeks, and it really only should have taken days. And it brought something back to me, which is kind of I don't know why I feel drawn to share this right now, but like um, there's a long history of using sleep deprivation as a spiritual practice. And right now, I feel very, very steeped in that practice.
I completely understand. Sometimes, I mean, usually it's not intentional, but I have definitely been in the space where lack of sleep is a test. Because life doesn't stop.
No, and it's like What I've noticed, this is not the first time I've been in this situation, and what I've noticed is it seems to like kind of quiet the conscious mind. So as you
Mm.
get sleepier and sleepier and sleepier and sleepier and have less energy, that's less energy for the conscious mind to operate, which brings up all of these subconscious feelings that just stay hidden most of the time. So it actually makes it easier if you're looking at it from a conscious perspective to really examine the unconscious beliefs and emotions because they're so much more present when the conscious mind doesn't have the energy to operate.
That's such a great way to put it, because I totally see what you mean. The like all of the thoughts, the ego thoughts, the negative thoughts, the judging thoughts, the grumpiness, like all the things arise are a lot, but it's an opportunity to see and hear all the different forms of that. But it's 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 a moment to moment thing. But I'm
Yeah,
glad you're with us and sharing the experience of your practice right now.
I'm glad to be back. It's been way too long.
Well, I think it's as good a time as any to welcome Mark on the stage. Everybody, please welcome for the first time Mark Lyons. Hey, Mark, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
It is our pleasure. And if you're ready to go, Mark, the stage is yours.
All right. Well, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Mark Lyons. I am a garden coach, a home cheesemaker, a home mushroom grower, and a musician. And putting it all together, I've branded myself as the Garden Troubadour. I run a business called Green Thumb at Your Service, where I help people with their vegetable gardens. I teach people how to grow more and better vegetables. I do it through one on one consulting, classes I teach, and presentations I give. I also give presentations on how to make your own cheese and grow your own mushrooms. And lastly, as a musician, I perform at folk festivals, farmers markets, children's parties, assisted living centers, any places where musical entertainment is wanted, that's where you'll find me. Green Thumb at Your Service was born out of a frustrating and fruitless job search that was getting me nowhere. A little bit of background. By education and training, I am an animal scientist. I got my bachelor's degree in animal science from the University of Illinois and my master's degree in animal nutrition from Purdue University. I started out my career working for a animal feed company in Chicago. That lasted 11 years, and when that ended, I switched careers to strategic management consulting, worked for a food service consultancy. And when that ended, I did what I've always done. I started looking for my next job, but something was going wrong. I wasn't landing. Everybody kept telling me I was doing all the right things, but nothing was happening. And it took me a little while, but I finally figured out the reason why I wasn't landing is because I had no heart for my search. I had been lying to myself, telling myself I wanted to go back into my former fields, when in reality, and not only that, I was willing to move anywhere to land a job, when in reality, that wasn't the case. And I quickly learned you can lie to others and you can get away with it, but you cannot lie to yourself and get away with it for long, because sooner or later, yourself rebels. And that's what happened to me. So I reached a point where I knew I didn't want to go back into any of my former fields. So what did I want to do? Well, I reached out to a friend of mine. I also belong to a networking group, job support group. We meet every Saturday morning at 7:30, and I've been a member of this group since 2000. And this particular gentleman, I considered him one of the wisest members of the group. So I reached out to him. We went to dinner, and I told him my story, and I said, where do I go from here? And he recommended that I isolate myself, get out of town for a week or so, and just use that time to clear my head and figure out what I wanted to do next. So one of the other members of the group offered me the use of his home in Galena, Illinois for the low, low price of $55 for the whole week. So I couldn't say no to that. So I made use of it. During the day, I would go into town and do all the touristy stuff. At night, I would do some journaling, read some books. And I came to the conclusion that if I wanted career satisfaction, I had to strike out on my own. But that raised the question, what could I do? What did I have to offer that people would be willing to pay me for? Well, I knew I liked to grow vegetables. I was a gardener, and people were always coming to me for advice. And then I got to thinking that nowadays, more and more people are becoming concerned about the produce that they eat, what's being sprayed on it, how it's being grown, what's being defecated on it. And many of those people started going to farmers markets where they could ask the farmer, how do you grow your produce? Do you use any harsh chemicals? Do you use any GMOs? And of those people, a subset of them were saying that I am so concerned about what goes on to my food that I eat, the produce that I eat, that the only way I can be 100% certain that nothing gets on it that I don't want is for me to grow it myself. But I don't know how to start. I've never done it. My grandmother did it, but I never paid attention. And I figured that's where I could come in. I could teach people how to grow their own vegetables. And I figured the quickest way to do it was to start teaching classes at community colleges. And that was the beginnings of Green Thumb at Your Service. And while I developed my class offerings, I figured, well, let's see, I also know how to make cheese. We'll offer that as a class just to have something additional to offer while I come up with new garden class ideas. And then later on, I started getting into mushroom growing, and so I added that as a class. And I combined that with my love of music. I make all my presentations unique by ending each one with a song. I have a song for each type of presentation. I have a gardening song, a cheese song, a dairy song, and a mushroom song. So that is Green Thumb at Your Service in a nutshell. That's what I do. Green Thumb at your service, as I said, well, it is about helping people with their gardens. It's also a story of overcoming a frustrating job search. And I know that a lot of people right now are struggling trying to find a job, people being laid off. And I think my experience could probably serve as a guidepost to some of them. So that's my story in a nutshell.
Thank you so much for sharing, Mark. It's I love, I can relate on many fronts. I mean, I'm not as great as a gardener as my mom. She's an incredible gardener, but I've had a pepper garden in my backyard. I had like 40 different pepper plants, but I love that you've taken, in your path, you came full circle into something that has always brought you joy, and and that you share it with others, that you've taken you've I'm very curious, not to put you on the spot. I want to hear your music. I want to hear your cheese song and your mushroom song and your
Okay.
but when as soon as you said you play folk festivals, I was like, I want to hear and see this guy play, because your
Okay.
I folk music is dear to my heart. But I want to ask you, there's so
Sure.
much you said that I love. I love that what you've done, what you're doing now, and who you're being now is, taking, you're doing, but how to put it this way, you're doing in the world what you're doing in gardens, is what I see, is your as I said earlier, you're planting seeds, but you are sharing that. Nothing. Gardening is one of those joys in life that, it's. I have pets as well. I have three cats, but it's very similar. When you put your heart in a garden, it kind of gives you this peace, and this it's something beyond just putting seeds in the ground. And I'm just curious, like, what is gardening given you, and like and why do you love to share that with others? Like, what is it that you see people get from that gift?
That's an excellent question, Abram. Well, one of the things that gardening does for me personally is it gives me a sense of satisfaction of taking something as small as a seed and putting it in the ground and watching it grow into something that produces fruit or vegetables that I can share with people. It's wonderful when I can share my bounty with other people and they get a chance to taste what good homegrown vegetables taste like. Um, Homegrown vegetables, nothing beats a homegrown fresh tomato. Um, my father always used to say when talking about store-bought tomatoes, he was not a man to mince words. He always said they're as hard as the holes in hell. And and also helping people with their own gardens, people who've tried to grow things and have maybe been having a frustrating time with that. If I can give them a bit of advice that helps their gardening efforts, then that gives them a sense of satisfaction. And I enjoy seeing the looks on people's faces when I can help them with their garden problems.
Oh, it's funny. Like I had a friend and teacher years ago who used to say, gardening is the most rebellious act possible, and you get strawberries.
Yes, yes. I truly believe that if more people were to grow their own fruits and vegetables, we could, and maybe I'm being a little overly dreaming here, overly ambitious, but I truly believe that if more and more people did it, we could bring some of those big food conglomerates to their knees.
I agree, and I don't feel like it's anything that needs to be done violently either. Like the way you're
Right,
talking
right.
about it, it's this kind of parallel polis that you're setting up where we're just creating something that simply works better than the existing system. And I'm curious, like, have you seen gardening not just as an act of rebellion, but also as a spiritual practice at all? And if so, what's your experience been?
I haven't really thought of it so much as a spiritual practice, but yeah, I can see where those elements would come into it because you're out in nature, you're working in harmony with the natural rhythms of the world. And especially if you can discipline yourself not to use any harsh chemicals or anything, which is why people are gardening in the first place. I always encourage people to do everything as natural as possible. I mean, it may not be possible to be 100% organic, but you can certainly avoid using any pesticides or insecticides or things like that. And just being out in nature, being out in the fresh air and sunshine, I think that really helps people to relax a little bit and slow down and just work with the natural rhythms of the earth.
Absolutely. Do you do you see? Well, I'll tell you a quick little anecdote. I
Sure.
have my I don't have my pepper garden anymore, but in my front yard I just have a flower garden, and it was battling the harsh winters. Here in Nashville we have odd weather patterns, but there was some negative weather, and I was fighting for the life of these plants to cover them from the snow. And these were my babies, and I didn't know how, but I was, consulting with every person I know, my mom, and to get these plants to survive these harsh conditions. And I was amazed how resilient. And now it's starting to change seasons. Not yet, but I mean, we're coming out of winter, and the plants. I'm always amazed at how resilient plants can be. But do you see, you know, when you what are the biggest obstacles you see for gardeners or people that are trying to grow a garden, you know, for food or for beauty?
I'm sorry, what was your question?
What do you see as the biggest obstacles? Like what do you like? How do you coach people?
Oh,
You
sure.
know, for what when they want to actually take on the garden
Sure.
and
Well, one of the
reconnect it.
obstacles that I see is that people who live in apartments or in condominiums where they don't have a big backyard, many times people think that, well, if I don't have a big backyard, I can't grow a vegetable garden. And that is not at all true. There's so much you can do in small spaces. And I actually have a whole class devoted to that I call vegetable gardening in small spaces. I saw a video one time of somebody in their downtown Manhattan apartment where they were on their balcony showing all the stuff they were growing. They were growing things like peppers, lettuces, other greens. And there's so much you can do in a small space. And so that's one of the challenges is convincing people that no, you don't have a big backyard, but yet there's still some things you can do. You may not be able to grow tomatoes and cucumbers and sweet corn, but you can grow other things that take up less space. So that's one of the challenges. And the other one of the things that I always counsel people about is that while gardening is a fun and relaxing hobby, as it should be, you still have to do a little bit of homework. And sometimes people tend to be a little bit slapdash about how they put a garden together. And one of the questions I sometimes get is people will come to me and say, Mark, my tomatoes didn't grow last year. And I'll ask them, okay, what cultivar did you plant? What variety? And the answer I almost always hear is, well, I don't know. I just went to Walmart and bought whatever they had. And the problem with that approach is whether you succeed or fail, you can't capitalize on it. If you grow something and it didn't work, you don't know what you planted, so you can't avoid it. At the same time, if it succeeds, you don't know what you planted, so you can't plant it again. So it's a question of number one, space and getting people to understand that you have to do a little bit of homework.
Right, with climate zones and where you live and what's the
Right. And
time of
not
the year.
only that, it's thinking about the space that you have. Do you have a microclimate in your yard? One of the stories I always like to tell is I call it my Jerusalem artichoke story. Jerusalem artichokes, if you're not familiar with them, they have nothing to do with Jerusalem or globe artichokes. Jerusalem artichokes they're knobby tubers. They kind of look like a potato with mumps. I planted one time. All I knew about them was that I tasted them and I liked them. So I'm going to plant some. So I planted 9 tuber pieces in my mom and dad's garden. And soon after they started growing, I read a little bit about them. And I'll always remember what I read: the Jerusalem artichoke or sunchoke in the sunflower family. And I thought, sunflower? Uh-oh. And sure enough, with stems as thick as my wrist, and oh my Lord, were they prolific. I had bagfuls of tubers that I was harvesting. And after the winter and the spring, the fun wasn't over because I discovered that the tubers that I missed digging up started to sprout. So
Wow.
it took me a good 2 years to clear it out of the garden. But had I read about them first, I might have been a little bit more hesitant about planting them. So, by the way, if you're looking to grow something that's virtually idiot proof, grow a Jerusalem artichoke because they grow in soils even too poor for potatoes.
Maybe
Wow.
just keep them contained some way. Yeah.
Exactly. So, I'm sorry, did I answer your question? I kind of went off on a tangent.
Oh no, yeah. I mean that was perfect. But I love what you were, what you were speaking to with, the urban farming. Like I really, well, a lot of, I feel like you live in Manhattan, New York City. You're like, what can I do? Or and I had the pleasure of, I'm a musician as well, and my first national tour with my band, we kind of made it an event tour where we went to organic farms across the country called aptly named Tour Organic.
I love it.
Should have trademarked it. It's a good one. But we played farms all over the place. I mean, starting in Northern California at Davis, and we went through the South. We went to North Carolina. Played a farm there, but we played at an urban farm in Philadelphia, and I was amazed. What they were able to it really. When you hear a word farm, you think of there's a barn, there's some cows and some you have this idea in your head about what a farm is, but like there are people like to this day who are not only utilizing space but doing creative ways to use the space to have these lush abundant gardens full of food and just beauty. So I mean, when you shared about that, that's what it made me think of. It's I feel like we limit what is possible when we think of like how little space we might have.
Right. And not only that, there are so many different varieties of vegetables. I always encourage my students and others to, if I can use a tomato analogy again, think outside the red. There are yellow tomatoes and orange tomatoes. There are purple tomatoes and black tomatoes. So instead of growing the same old, why not try something a little bit different? Or try something totally outside what you would normally think of as growing in a vegetable garden. One year I decided to try growing sugar beets. That's one of the ways that we get sugar in this country, through cane or through beets. And it falls under the category of, it seemed like a good idea at the time. And but it actually worked out. I grew them. They were nice and big, and I was able to chop them in pieces, boil them in water, strain out the plant material, and boil it down and get the molasses, which after that I just kind of let it get hard, and I just ground it up and made it a molasses sugar compound. To get the actual sugar out of it, I would need ether, and I'm not about to mess with that stuff. But again, it's something that you normally don't think of in a vegetable garden, but it just seemed like just so much fun to try. The idea of trying something new, I said, let's go for it and see what happens, which is kind of almost the theme of my whole business, because when I decided that I was going to strike out on my own, I reasoned it as, I mean, on one hand, yeah, being an entrepreneur is risky, but then given that how so many businesses are laying people off, there's really no more safety in a corporate job than there is in entrepreneurship. And the ultimate trump card for me was, I said, when I turn 80 years old and I look back on my life, I would much rather say, I tried this and it didn't work out, but I know that, as opposed to saying, I wonder what would have happened if I had tried this, but now I'll never know.
Right.
There's about three questions that came up in that I want all the answers to all of them now. So I don't know
Okay.
which order I'm actually going to ask these in. Um, let's just go chronologically. So the first question, because you were talking about creativity, like think outside the red. And I'm curious, what has been the most innovative, creative gardening setup you've ever seen? And what did you really love about it? What didn't work about
Hmm. That's an interesting question. I don't know if I can point to one single thing. Um, Probably about the best example I can give is I was at a folk festival in Battleground, Indiana, some years ago. This is a festival I've been a big part of for years. I lead their children's concert. I teach some musical workshops, but I was staying at a motel in nearby West Lafayette, Indiana. And I just happened to wander around the back and I saw that the proprietor was growing vegetables in old tires. So just the idea of, hey, he repurposed something which would normally get thrown away and was growing some vegetables out of it. And I thought, what a great idea. It's not necessarily something that you look at and say, ooh, ah, but it just to me, gave me almost a sense of satisfaction, for lack of a
it?
better word, that, hey, people are gardening and they're not letting the lack of a big backyard or a big acreage stop them. They're making use out of any materials they can get their hands on. So I'd say more power to him.
Oh, yeah, I appreciate that. Anything that like really brings in something that already exists and
Mm-hmm.
repurposes it. Like no one's ever going to use those tires again in the U.S. Maybe in India or somewhere else they would retread them or something like that. But that's not a thing that happens here. And so like, why not use them for gardening? Especially if it helps you do something you couldn't do otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I dig that. Um, so second question, and actually I just realized this is not quite chronological order. We were talking about really small spaces earlier. But going back to the urban environments and having just like little gardens on your balcony or things like that. I know there's like crazy wild examples like the High Line in New York City where they just kind of like got in guerrilla gardens and then eventually got the approval of the city, and now it's this amazingly beautiful place that you can walk through, and it's a big community garden. But I'm curious if you've seen that on a smaller scale, like maybe like a high rise who is cooperating to grow different things in different units, and they have like a high rise community garden or something like
Hmm. The closest I think I've seen is I went to a presentation by a gentleman named Bill Shores, who was managing the vegetable garden for one of the restaurants in Chicago, and he showed a slide of the gardens he was doing. It was on top of a roof,
that.
and it was making use of that rooftop acreage, and I was amazed at all the things that he was growing on there.
Wow. Like, was that something that was used by the entire building, or just was he doing it by himself? Like, was there more community involvement?
I think he was mainly doing it himself with a few volunteers. I don't know if there was community involvement, but I've seen a community garden or two, and I just think that that's such a wonderful idea that, I think it brings people together, it gets people talking, and, I think it almost contributes to a sense of peace that people are doing something that just seems so natural.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's nothing quite like, eating the food that you grow. And it's like it's the satisfaction and fulfillment, you know, I there's nothing like it. And to one of your points about doing your homework, the first time I had a vegetable garden, I kind of did the whatever. I kind of like this. I'm gonna try that. And it's like I don't eat that much, but I'll try this. So I had like kind of a hodgepodge of a little bit of like a pepper too. I'll try the tomatoes, try a leafy green, and like kind of not really knowing what would grow in I'm not from Nashville, but like not knowing what really grows well in the region or the time of year. And it was like I had some decent, I had some decent growth on some things, but the next go round, it was during the pandemic, which was the most amazing time for gardening.
Mhm.
Not much else to do, but that's when I had my pepper garden, and I kind of nicknamed it the plethora of peppers. But
I like
I had
that.
40. I love peppers of all kinds, but I literally had 40 different peppers. Right, I was like engineer minded about how I had this spaced out. I know I had that be exactly like 18 inches apart, and I know I could space it here. So I literally had there must have been 8 or 9 different types of peppers, from like from the classics to more abstract, or to more niche pepper. Like I had jalapenos, Anaheim peppers, these peppers out of Florida called datil peppers, habaneros, cayenne, poblano. So I just went to town, and I loved it because it was something that it gave me fulfillment and satisfaction, something that I could connect and put love into, but it also something I could share. Like I had more peppers than I could ever deal with. So it was something to share, and it was really satisfying. And what I guess, well, I know Matthew had a third question, but what's your favorite thing to grow, you know, for yourself, and what's your favorite thing to grow for others?
My favorite thing to grow for myself is I like to grow sweet corn.
Hmm.
Um, it's been kind of a challenge the past few years because where I grow it, um, a little bit of background. I live in a townhome, so I also do not have a big backyard to grow vegetables in. But fortunately, I have a good friend. She's not only my friend, but she's also my musical partner. And she and her husband have a big backyard, and they've graciously allowed me to garden in it. So one of the things I always talk about is another way of having a vegetable garden is if you don't have a big backyard, maybe somebody else does. I call that OPS, using other people's space. So, but one of the challenges I have with sweet corn or just flour corn or any kind of corn is the squirrels kind of insist that I share my bounty with them, and they pretty much take it all. So, and I'm a big believer in, as much as I get frustrated with the squirrels stealing my corn, I cannot bring myself to do any harm to them.
Hmm.
I don't want to trap them. I don't want to kill them. On the other hand, however, I do not feel obligated to share. So I have no qualms about doing things to block them, repel them. So it kind of the challenge was one of the things I like about sweet corn is, first of all, not a lot of people grow it for some
Yeah.
of the same reasons that I mentioned. And I figured if I can overcome these challenges, yes, I can have something sweet to eat as a result. So I figured, all right, what's one way to keep the squirrels from stealing my corn? And I thought about it and I thought about it and I said, I know. This was an extreme measure, but I hand pollinated the ears. Then I covered them up with socks. Then I used rebar wire to lash the ears to the stalks. So the squirrels could not only couldn't take them off the stalk, they couldn't even take small bites out of them.
Wow.
And the first time I did it, I got my first decent corn crop in years. So I was like, ha, take that. The other thing I like to grow, actually, there's two things that I like to grow for myself. The other is potatoes.
Hmm.
And the I like growing potatoes, but the problem with it is that they take up so much space in the garden.
Hmm.
And they sometimes you don't have a lot of space for other things. So in the spirit of utilizing the space that you have, I found a really good article in Fine Gardening magazine that talked about growing potatoes in a tower. Essentially, you take fencing wire and make a cylinder out of it. Then you use rebar and rebar wire to anchor it into the garden. Then you use alternating layers of straw, soil, and seed potatoes. Then another layer of soil, another layer of straw, and you build up this tower. The potatoes then grow, the vines then grow through the fencing wire. And at the end, when you're ready to harvest them, you just take the whole thing apart and harvest the spuds. And I've gotten some great harvests that way. So, so those are the things I like growing for myself. For others, I like growing, it sounds trite, but tomatoes. One of my best customers, also a good friend of mine, the first time I helped them with their garden, I grew some big Zack tomatoes, a variety of tomatoes that the fruits can get as large as 5 pounds. I've never grown it that big. I think the best I got was 2 pounds. But just they tell me every year how much they love those tomatoes, how much their neighbors and friends love them and think they're just so great. So yeah, just the fact that they're so loved by these good customers of mine, it gives me incentive to grow them year after year.
Wow. That kind of comes into question number 3, like the types of vegetables you grow. You mentioned earlier, like, just going into Walmart and picking up whatever's there. Like, oh, I don't know what I grew. Like, I just bought it at Walmart. Um, there's a guy, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, Dan Barber. He lives in New York, and he had a very hedonistic idea. So, like, he's like, when I was a kid, I remember a tomato was a meal. Like, it was just so juicy and so dense and so delicious that was just a meal. He's like, I couldn't find those tomatoes anymore. And so he ended up partnering with Cornell University. He went back into their seed bank and pulled out tomato seeds from 200 years ago, and starts growing them. And he's breeding them for one thing and one thing only: flavor. That's it. Pure hedonism. But in this journey, what he discovered over time is the fruits and vegetables that actually taste better are actually more nutrient dense.
Yes.
And they're better for you.
Yes.
And so, like, for someone starting out in this journey, where would you, like, what are some places you would send them to get seeds of really good nutrient dense vegetables? And, like, what kind of resources would you give them as far as, like, soil that can really provide the nutrients of those vegetables and fruits?
Okay, well, let's answer the first part of your question first. For good seeds, I would recommend going to any of the online seed catalogs, seed houses. Some places where I like to buy my seeds, I get all my tomato seeds from Totally Tomatoes. They're on the web at totallytomatoes.com. I get my bean seeds from the Vermont Bean Seed Company. And they're both owned by J.W. Young. So that's another good place. They're another old line seed house. Burpee is another good place to get seeds. One place that I really like to go to is the Seed Savers Exchange. Seed Savers Exchange, they kind of speak to, what you were talking about earlier about growing tomatoes, for flavor. Seed Savers Exchange is more than just a place to buy seeds from. They're dedicated. Their mission is to preserve the seed genetic heritage of our nation. They got their start. I went to a presentation by one of the founders, Diane Ott Whaley. She was speaking at the Chicagoland Flower and Garden Show back when they had the show, another thing that COVID killed. But she talked about how she got her start when somebody gave her some seeds. I think it might have been the outhouse hollyhocks. They were hollyhocks that were meant to grow around an outhouse. Many years ago, if you needed to go to the bathroom, this was before they had indoor plumbing, it was considered bad form to say, I have to go to the outhouse. So what you would say is, I'm going to go out to the hollyhocks, and the hollyhocks were growing. So that was, if I remember her story correctly, that was how she got her start. And then people started sending her seeds. Hey, my grandfather grew this variety. So they would they would plant the seeds, grow the vegetables, and save the seeds. And gradually they developed their own seed bank. So Seed Savers Exchange is a place where you can purchase seeds, but you can also, exchange seeds, give some seeds you've saved, and in turn get other seeds in return. So they're on a mission. They're doing more than just selling seeds, and the seeds that you can get from them are of excellent quality. I like Gurney's Seed and Nursery. That's where I get my two varieties of cucumbers that I grow. I like to grow a burpless variety, either the Sweet Success or the Straight Eight. Burpless cucumbers are low acid. So if you have a sensitive stomach, they won't disturb you. And they're long and thin. They're big. So it's always nice when I say, "Oh, can I share a cucumber with you?" And they say, "Sure." And I give them my big Whopper cucumber. There's like, "Wow, that's a cucumber." And my pickling cucumbers, the Miss Pickler variety, very, very prolific. Last year I canned about 20 jars of pickles. So they're very prolific. My favorite place of all to shop, the one place where I could either max out my credit card or empty my wallet in a hurry, is the Gardner Supply Company of Burlington, Vermont. Gardner Supply, in addition to selling seeds, they sell a lot of innovative gardening solutions. That's where I bought my grow light setup from. I mean, some of their stuff can be expensive, but it works. And I had the occasion, I was on vacation one time. I was spending 2 weeks in Vermont. So I went to Burlington and I walked into their headquarters and I was blown away. They put every other nursery that I've ever seen to shame with what they have. They have test plots and testing sites for some of the equipment and things that they have. I saw one where they said, "Well, we created this item, but we think we can do it better. So we're comparing this one to the old one, and we'll see how it works out." And I was just amazed. So, and the great thing is that there are also seed houses out there, which I get their catalogs. I haven't purchased anything yet, but it helps me in my research. One of the things I tell people is that, if you're looking to grow, this goes back to what I said earlier about doing your research, that you can use the seed catalogs to kind of figure out what you want to plant. Maybe if you've planted open pollinated heirloom tomatoes, but they haven't grown so well, you've had a problem with late blight or early blight, the disease of tomatoes. Well, maybe instead of planting an heirloom variety, you'd be better off planting a disease-resistant hybrid. And you can use those catalogs to look up all the different varieties and maybe find a disease-resistant hybrid that will resist some of the diseases you've been having a problem with. So you can use the catalog to do your research, and then you can check your local nurseries to see if maybe they have that particular variety and save yourself the cost of postage and handling from ordering it online. If they don't have it, you can always order it online. That was kind of a long-winded answer, and I think I got off on a tangent, but did I answer your question?
Yeah, and I would love. Would you do us a favor after the show? Shoot us an email with links to all of those that you just mentioned, like your favorite places, and we'll add
Sure,
it as a comment in Facebook so other people can find them as well.
sure, absolutely.
Very much
I
appreciated.
always tout I'm always big on Gardner Supply, and I'm always mentioning them in my classes. And I always have to tell my students, now, full disclosure, I don't work for Gardner Supply. They're not paying me to promote their products. I am speaking merely as a satisfied customer.
Which is the best testimonial anyone can give, right? Like
Yes,
when
yes.
you've got somebody.
And that's kind of one of the ways I built my business, is that I started by teaching classes. And one of the things that I learned early on is that just telling people, hey, I'm a garden coach. I can help you with your gardens. And, they'll just look at you and say, oh, really? I'm skeptical. Why? I don't know you. Why should I buy your services? But if I'm up there teaching a class and people can get a chance to see me and hear me in action, and they think, well, he sounds like he knows what he's doing, I'll give him a whirl. And I've gotten some business that way. People who have come to my classes or presentations who've contacted me later and said, hey, Mark, I'm having a little problem with my garden. Would you come out to my yard and, maybe take a look and tell me what I'm doing wrong or give me some tips that would help me out? So once again, satisfied customers.
Yeah, well, well, that brings another question to mind is,
Sure.
so when you are purchasing, food to eat that is not your own that you've grown, what questions do you ask at farmers market, to make you buy anything, that you haven't grown? Like, what do you usually ask?
Well, this is going to sound awful, but to tell you the truth, I don't really feel the need to ask them a question, because if they're growing it themselves and if they're at a farmer's market, I just figure that, they're, because they're not selling at a supermarket or they're not a big conglomerate, that they're not doing anything that I would consider harmful. So I have confidence in what they're doing. So I don't really feel the need to ask them. And many of them, they'll have wording or they'll have displays that say all organically grown, no GMOs or something like that. So I take them at their word.
So
And I've gotten some
jump.
really excellent stuff from farmers markets.
Yeah, me as well.
This goes back to the second part of my question about the soil and regenerative practices.
Oh,
Is
yes.
this something? So can you just speak a little bit to your experience about just the state of most of the soil in the United States and maybe some things that you've done to help your own garden?
Sure, sure. Well, one of the things that I always remind my students of, especially those that live in single family homes with a yard, I remind them that when the developers built your house, they pretty much stripped off all the good topsoil, and what you're pretty much left with is clay. And I actually saw this in action one time. One of my good friends, I was helping her plant some hostas. I sunk my spading fork into the area where she wanted to plant, and that stuff was pure clay. You could have put it on the potter's wheel and made yourself a vase out of it. So I figured, let's not mess around. We dug out all of that clay, and she went to her nearby nursery and she got several bags of topsoil and mushroom compost, and we filled that whole enclosure with both those with both with the soil and the mushroom compost. We dug it all around. I added some fertilizer, and she planted her hostas, and success. Those hostas came back every year, and they were beautiful. So one of the things I tell my students in terms of their soil is the soil that you have in your backyard is probably not all that great. So you may want to first, just to get a baseline of what you've got, is to test your soil. You can either purchase a soil test meter from any nursery. You can get a soil test kit, or for the most accurate results, take some samples, send it into a laboratory, and see what kind of results you get in terms of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, anything else you want to test for, sulfur, calcium, and then based on that, amend the soil. I recommend using things like mushroom compost, leaf mold, earthworm castings, which is just a fancy word for earthworm poop, but it's good poop. And what else can you? A little bit of organic fertilizer. If you use manure, just be aware that manure is very high in nitrogen and very low in phosphorus. And if you overfeed manure, you're going to get plants with lots and lots of nice green leaves, but very little in the way of fruit and flowers. So if you use manure, you want to be sure to add a source of phosphorus, like dicalcium phosphate or super triple phosphate fertilizer, something like that. So those are some things you want to mix into the soil to loosen it up a little bit and add some nutrients to it. And you may have to, it may take you a couple of years before you get really, really good soil.
You mentioned mushroom compost a couple of times.
Mhm.
I've never heard of that. Is like, and you talked a little bit at the end about nitrogen, like they were being really high in nitrogen but not phosphorus. Is that one of the reasons you like mushroom compost? And like, kind of just walk us through that a little bit.
Sure. Mushroom compost is basically the leftover substrate from growing mushrooms. It could be something like manure, it could be straw, coffee grounds, depending on the kind of mushrooms that have been grown. And it's got a little bit left of the remnants of the mushrooms that were grown in there. So it's very nutrient rich in a lot of different things. And adding that to the soil also adds some space between the clay particles. So it helps to loosen the soil a little bit. The only caution with mushroom compost is that it tends to be high in salts and sodium. So you don't want to use too much of it. You want to use it in conjunction with some other things like the manure, the leaf mold, the earthworm castings, etc. Other things you can use. If your soil test were to show that your soil was deficient in sulfur, for example, ammonium sulfate is a great thing to add because it adds the ammonium, the NH3 plus, which is how plants get their nitrogen. And it also adds the sulfur. Or you can just use plain old ordinary elemental sulfur. The only caution that I have about that is that you don't want to use it on anything that you're going to can, because any remnant of sulfur left over on the cucumbers they're trying to pickle or anything else, it will unite with the oxygen in the jars from the heat of the canning process and cause your jars to explode. So unless you want to turn your kitchen into the jet propulsion laboratory, go easy on the elemental sulfur. Another thing that's great to use to add nutrients to your soil is what's known as green manure or cover crops. They're basically crops that are grown to be chopped up and spaded under. And that's a great natural way to add nutrients to your soil. If you grow things like alfalfa or hairy vetch, you'll grow them, let them winter kill, and then using a rototiller or something, you'll chop them up and work them back into the soil. And this adds organic material to the soil, and it adds some nutrients as well. One of the toughest nutrients to work with in the soil is phosphorus, because phosphorus may be in the soil, but it may be locked up in the organic matter in the soil and not available to the plants. Growing things like daikon radishes or hairy vetch, they push their way through heavy soils, and they can take up some of that phosphorus. And now the phosphorus, instead of being locked up in the plant material, instead of being locked up in the soil, is now in the plant material. So when it's winter killed and you dig and chop it up, now that phosphorus is now readily available in the soil and readily available to the plants. So those are just some examples of some things that you can work into the soil to help improve the tilth, the structure, the texture, and the nutrient content. Also growing legumes. Legumes are most plants cannot get nitrogen from the atmosphere. They have to get it from the soil, but legumes are able to form a symbiotic relationship with certain soil bacteria. That bacteria is able to take nitrogen from the air and bring it into the soil. And if you grow legumes, if you were to take a legume like an alfalfa or a bean or a pea, and you were to pull it out of the ground and look at the roots, you'd see little nodules on those roots. And if you were to section those off and put them under a microscope, you'd see the nitrogen fixing bacteria. The American Indians knew about this. That's why they would grow what we know as the three sisters: corn, beans, and squash. The corn would provide the the corn grain for the Indians, but the vines of the corn, or the stems of the corn, would act as a structure for the beans to grow on. The beans, in turn, with the nitrogen fixing bacteria, would provide nitrogen to the soil for the corn and the squash to grow. The squash, in turn, the leaves of the squash would shade the soil to keep it from losing too much moisture, evaporation. Also, in turn, it would keep the corn and the beans from the raccoons, because when the raccoons would walk on the spiny vines of the squash, it would hurt their delicate little paws. It would kind of be like you walking barefoot on a bed of nails.
Wow.
So once again, that was a long-winded answer, but did I answer
Oh,
your
yeah.
question?
Yeah, absolutely. There's this topic is one that we could go on ad nauseum for days. Like, there's
Oh
so
yeah,
much involved.
I teach whole classes on these things, and
Yeah.
I could talk for hours on just soil structure alone.
Oh gosh, yeah. Like,
Well, yes, and we haven't even mentioned composting.
Yeah, please.
composting, and there's one other thing that I really want to ask you about, and that's the mycelium networks that the plants use to communicate.
Ah,
Like,
yes.
so getting those seeded and cultivating those in your soil as well, so that you have better communication, and plants can do things like carbon transfer, and the mycelium actually brings nutrients to the plants as well. So like composting and mycelium, like just go, like
Just have at it.
Absolutely.
yeah, have
Absolutely.
at it.
And some people also prescribe to what's known as no-till gardening, as opposed, instead of turning over your soil every year, they instead choose to just lay additional levels of topsoil, compost on it, and then or some mulch. And then when they want to plant, they just move the mulch off to the side, and they dig the hole, they plant and put the mulch back, and they don't disturb the soil structure. And it's a different school of thought. Some people prefer to till, some people do no till. I'm not fanatical about either one. Whatever works for you. Basically, gardening sometimes can be a learn as you go practice. You try something, it works, great, you do it again. If it doesn't work, you do something else the following year.
Yeah, I think there's so much. I mean, well, first off, thank you for sharing all your wisdom and knowledge on all that.
You're welcome.
There's so much depth, no pun intended, to gardening. There's so much, there's so many ways to go about it, and there's so many reasons to do it. And I'm curious, before we finish, you said you also, I know nothing about growing mushrooms, and I know nothing about cheese, but if you would share with us just a little bit about, I love growing plants, but I know nothing about growing mushrooms and cheese.
Sure. Mushrooms are the fruiting body of a fungus. Not all fungi grow mushrooms. Mushrooms are to fungi what flowers are to green plants. They're the fruiting body. The mushroom contains the spores, which the whole life cycle. If you start with the spores, the spores produce the mycelium. The individual mycelium are trying to find each other to unite and produce the lower structure, and this eventually colonizes the medium, and then with Mother Nature telling them, okay, now is the time to reproduce, the mushrooms or the fungi will then produce that fruiting body, which will then release more spores, and the whole cycle starts over again. Some mushrooms, of course, are edible, some are not. Actually, let me rephrase that. All mushrooms are edible, but some are edible only once. So I'm more into growing mushrooms instead of foraging for them. I in my classes, I touch briefly on foraging, and I say, if you're going to do that, get an expert if you've never done it before, because there are old mushroom hunters and there are bold mushroom hunters, but there are no old, bold mushroom hunters. Growing mushrooms I would tell the first time mushroom grower to start with a kit. You can buy mushroom kits. Home Depot sells some mushroom growing kits. They're very easy to use. The instructions are simple. You open the back of the kit at the perforations, cut slits in the plastic, keep them moist, and they'll eventually grow the mushrooms. Those are usually oyster mushrooms, which grow rapidly and are very easy to grow. If you want to do something a little more complicated, you can buy mushroom kits from places like Field and Forest, or you can make your own mushroom bed out of wood chips or oak chips or other things like that and grow mushrooms. It's like I said, I teach a whole class on this from start to finish. Um, I don't know what else can I tell you about mushroom growing.
Well, it sounds like a whole lot. I'm curious. I had never considered growing my own mushrooms, but now you kind of it's kind of a curiosity I might look into.
Yeah.
Depending on all the different varieties.
And another thing you can do is once if you start from a kit, another way to grow mushrooms, this is an old way of doing it, is to grow them on logs or stumps. You simply drill holes in the logs. You pound what are known as oh shoot, I forget what they're called.
I think they're just plugs.
Plug spore. Thank you. Plug spawn.
Yeah.
That's the word I'm looking for. They're basically pieces of dowel rods that have been inoculated with mushroom spores. You simply pound those into the holes. You can then seal the holes with melted soy wax, and then just keep them in a shady spot, keep them moist, and eventually the mushrooms will grow in the logs, and then you can stand them up. And if you do it right, you can get mushrooms for years on end. This is a great way to grow shiitakes or king stropharias or oyster mushrooms, button mushrooms, so many different kinds you can grow.
Yeah, and then once you get that going, like you can actually turn that into a business pretty easily.
Exactly. Or another thing you can do, if you grow a mushroom from a kit, some kits, after the kits no longer produce mushrooms, you can take the remnants of that kit, create your own mushroom bed, spread the remnants in that mushroom bed, and they'll start to grow again.
That's awesome. Well,
and as far as I know, you asked about cheese making.
Yeah. I was gonna ask you again. Yeah, please tell us.
I got my start with cheese making from I was in Vermont again on vacation. I was at Woodstock Farms in Woodstock, Vermont, and I was thumbing through the books in their gift shop, and I came upon one, Home Cheese Making. And as I thumbed through the pages, a moment of madness came over me, and a voice whispered my ear and said, "Wouldn't this be fun to try?" And when the moment of madness had passed, I found my arms were one book heavier, my wallet a few dollars lighter. How that happened, I have no clue. But eager to try out my newfound hobby, I went home and I ordered the 30-minute mozzarella kit from the New England Cheese Making Supply Company. And I'd like to say that my first batch of mozzarella was delicious and flavorful and everything mozzarella should be, but I'm just not that big a liar. But let's just say there was room for improvement, but improve I did. And I eventually started making more soft cheeses. And when I gained the confidence of the soft cheeses that I made, I ordered a press and I started making harder cheeses. The first hard cheese I ever made was a Hispanico cheese, which is what a manchego is if you make it out of cow's milk. So, but as I said, cheese making is an art and a science, and I recommend if you're going to start with making cheese that you start small, that you start with the soft cheese. Get that 30-minute mozzarella kit, and it'll kind of help you get your feet wet in making cheese. And if you can get a good book on cheese making, start with some of the simpler recipes, and gradually build up your skill and experience, and then you can graduate to some of the more difficult cheeses. And you don't have to get farm fresh milk. You can make it with just store-bought milk, as long as the milk is not ultra pasteurized. Ultra pasteurized milk is basically worthless for making cheese. It's got to at least be pasteurized milk if it's going to be store-bought.
Yeah, maybe see if you can like find a local farm that allows you to purchase a cow share where you can get raw milk or something like that.
That's another way. And if you
Yeah.
want to make it with raw milk, that's raw milk is excellent to make cheese with. That in itself is a controversial topic. The United States government takes a dim view of anything made with raw milk. Um, some people will say that if two people want to enter into a private arrangement with raw milk, that's nobody's business but theirs. The United States government thinks otherwise. Any farm that wants to deal in raw milk has to get special clearance from the USDA. They have to fill out forms in triplicate, agree to multiple surprise inspections. And even after all of that, they still get raided and closed down. You know, the farmer could be enjoying just a quiet evening at home, and all of a sudden they get a knock at the door. You got raw milk in there? No, no, no. We just have fentanyl and cocaine and heroin. You got raw milk? Come out with your hands up. Your tax dollars at work.
Yep.
Yeah, and this cycles right back around to gardening and doing
Yeah.
the greatest act of rebellion you could possibly do. Like it's pretty amazing. It's also amazing to me how much subtlety there is in all of these, like gardening, cheese making, and anything with that level of subtlety makes it, to me at least, makes a wonderful spiritual practice.
Oh,
So
absolutely, absolutely. And you know, when it comes to things like cheese making, one of the things I always go over with my students is the what's in it for me aspect. You know, why should you garden? Why should you make your own cheese? Why should you grow your own mushrooms? And I talk about things like, it's more nutritious what you grow your own, it's more flavorful. But one of the things is it gives you a sense of pride into to know that you can do this on your own. And that can translate into a certain spirituality. If you make a delicious cheese and you bring it to a dinner party and your friends say, "Oh, this is great cheese. Where did you buy it?" You get to draw yourself up to your full height and say, "I didn't buy it. I made it." Then all your friends, ooh and ah, and they say, "We're not worthy. We're not worthy." But especially, in the broader sense of the word, just to be able to do something like this, to be able to take a tiny seed and make it grow into a huge plant that produces fruit and flowers to delight the eye and the palate, or to just take an ordinary carton of milk and with a little heat and a little enzyme to turn it into a delicious cheese. Just to know that you're working with the rhythms of nature and you're 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 feeling it, you're working with the rhythms of life. It just gives you a sense of peace. It was Louis Pasteur that encouraged people to seek out the peace that is found in libraries and laboratories. Well, I would add to that, and I would also say, seek out the serene peace that's found in gardens. Because gardeners, just like research people, you rarely find a gardener that's had a nervous breakdown. Gardeners just don't have time for that. We're too busy watering and weeding and cultivating and harvesting.
So beautifully
absolutely.
said. I love all of that. And I love that you started the cheese from the inside of Vermont, because that seems like an appropriate place to start. And I see you've
Vermont is a
got it.
beautiful state.
It
If you've never
is,
been there, I recommend taking some time there.
and they love cheese.
Now, you also mentioned you had expressed an interest in my cheese song and my garden songs. And
Yeah, I was just gonna ask if you would like to close this out with
yes,
one of your
it just so
songs.
happens I have my trusty ukulele here.
Oh, awesome!
Um,
Perfect.
by the way, I always like to tell people that I'm in favor of the right of all Americans to keep and bear ukuleles, because when ukuleles are banned, only bands will have ukuleles. So, this is my cheese song. Actually, a little bit of just a brief history about it. I was doing a presentation at the public library in Crown Point, Indiana. It was a presentation I have on growing and using herbs, and the program director knew I was going to be coming back later on that year to do my cheese making presentation. So as I was walking out the door, her last words to me were, "I want a cheese song." So I wrote this one. Oh, cheese doesn't grow on trees. It comes out of the milk of mammalian species. It's the food of the gods, and this I know. A meal with cheese is the way to go. You can serve it for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or a snack. Cheddar, Manchego, Brie, or Monterey Jack, or any of the other 3,000 different kinds out there, but not Velveeta. And for God's sakes, not Cheese Whiz. You can serve it with friends, eat it alone, have it on vacation, or enjoy it at home. A platter of cheese makes the world all right, 'cause any way you slice it, it's an utter delight. Oh, cheese doesn't grow on trees. It comes out of the milk of mammalian species all around the world. And from here to Crimea, serving cheese is a good idea. Excuse me.
Ooh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, bravo. That's
Thank
awesome.
you.
I love it. I want to hear a whole set. I bet it's so much fun seeing you at a festival. I love your passion and your just, your determination and commitment to just share, the things that bring you so much joy. And it's, it makes me want to go back to looking at my garden and starting my vegetable garden again, and look into mushrooms and cheese. Sounds like a good idea.
Absolutely. And the other thing is that I always, in the other little cherry on the top that I do is I try to present my topics in an entertaining manner, with the ukulele, and I'll always sprinkle in some jokes and some awful puns. I always warn my students and the audience member, be warned, the jokes only get worse.
Well, I'm enjoying it, and you're certainly entertaining me. I really it's such an honor and a pleasure to have you share with us, Mark, and we'd love to have you come back and share with us some more.
Oh, I'd love
Maybe
to.
hear some more songs. I'm like, I want to. Where like, just curious, whereabouts do you live and where do you perform?
I live in Palatine, Illinois, about 30 miles northwest of Chicago. I usually perform around the northwest suburbs of Cook County, northwest suburban Chicago. I play a lot of farmers markets, sometimes solo, excuse me, sometimes with my musical partner. And usually the last weekend of June, you'll find me, as I mentioned earlier, in Battleground, Indiana. That's the weekend of the Indiana Fiddlers Gathering. Unfortunately, this year, they're not having the festival. They've had to postpone it for a year, but that's a whole other story I won't get into. But usually that's the weekend I'm there. I lead their children's concert. I love entertaining children. That's what my partner and I do a lot of. We bring percussion instruments for the kids to play along with us. And I'll usually end my set for the children. I'll have them line up behind me and we'll march around the grounds, have a little mini parade. So, but, and as far as my presentations, my gardening presentations, cheese making, mushrooms, I'm usually in the tri-state area of Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. I do some occasional online presentations, usually through the auspices of the Mid-Continent Public Library in Independence, Missouri. I do a lot online for them. And if you go to my website, www.greenthumbAtYourService.com, I have my complete schedule there, and it'll say where where I'm giving my next presentations, and which ones online, which ones are live. So if you want to check out one of my online presentations, that's a good way to see what I'm doing without having to leave the comfort of your own home.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for sharing your passion, your wisdom with us. And, I love what you're up to, what you're doing, who you are as a gift. And I just want to thank you
Thank
for
you.
sharing it with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me to join you, and I enjoyed this too. It was a pleasure meeting both of you and sharing my gift with you. And I will try to, if not tonight, then tomorrow, I'll email you. I've got Matt. I've got your email there, so I will email you the list of places where I shop, where I get my seeds and soil and other things,
Awesome.
and we can take it from there.
Please do. Yeah. Thank you so
Awesome.
much. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much again, Mark. And thank you all for tuning in and being with us. I want to take this chance just to invite you to share on this stage, just like Mark, share your gift. Whether you have a song about cheese or not, we invite you to share. And this is why we're here. This is what One Day is about. Our mission is bringing you and me and communities together in joyous celebration, unifying humanity in our diversity to create a better world for us all. And that's part of our one day vision, which is humanity's rising in a connected world with each person's unique gifts, unique contributions, unique genius are being valued and magnified through a higher level of collaboration, producing unprecedented new realms of possibility. And who knows what will happen when each of us choose to plant those seeds or grow that cheese or those mushrooms, just like Mark. But thank you again, Mark, and thank you all. And as always, everybody, one day is today. See you guys soon.